My name is Ekaterina. I'm co-founder of Future London Academy, and welcome to our Chief Design Officer series with a very special guest. Our guest today is Chief Design Officer at Zoom, the platform we're actually using to record this. How incredible is that? Mark Kawano has been in the industry for over 20 years, designing products and leading teams in some of the best tech companies. And I have to say, when I was looking at Mark's journey and experience, I was just blown away. How can one person work in some of the best companies in the world? So Mark worked at Apple, at Square, at Slack, at Zendesk, and now at Zoom. Can anyone ever fit so many incredible companies in one CV? Well, we'll find out how Mark did it in a second, but let's welcome Mark. How are you doing?
Thank you, Katharina, and hello, everybody. What an awesome introduction. I'm so happy to be here. I'm a little bit sick, so I'm going to try to bring the energy. I think seeing so many people from around the world has already given me a little bit of a boost. So definitely keep the chat live. And I think your energy, Katharina, will keep me going through this session. So thank you for having me. I'm very excited to talk with all of you.
Brilliant. Well, we'll try to make it as easy for you as possible. And hopefully we'll have very inspiring conversation today. So that will keep you up for the whole hour and a half that we have together. And I would love to start with something I already mentioned in the introduction, which is your incredible journey. But one particular thing that is very interesting about your journey, it's not just the incredible companies that you work for, but you worked for a lot of founders. You were at Apple during Steve Jobs' time, and you always were in these companies that were very much in founder mode. And after Brian Chesky gave a big speech about founder mode, everyone kind of went crazy. What does it mean to have a founder mode? What does it mean for design teams to be in companies that have founders leading them? So can you tell us a little bit more about your journey through these incredible companies, and maybe what did you learn from different founders that you worked for?
Yeah, so this is a great question. And, so much of my career, and you're asking, how I ended up here at the beginning. A lot of it is working hard, but I think so much of it, and I think many of you with experience know that a lot of it is just luck and good timing and being at the right time in the right place. And when I think about the companies that I've worked at with amazing founders that I've been able to work for or sometimes partner with in the later part of my career, a lot of it just happened. And then towards the end, it started becoming intentional when I started connecting the dots backwards. And so starting my career at Adobe was, this really interesting experience. Whereas fresh out of college, and I was working for these founders back then, working on this product, Photoshop, where we used to design all the software in. And I was lucky enough to be there when the founders were still there. Went to Fraud Design, and Hartmut was still running the firm there, and then Apple. At those times, I wasn't seeking founder-led companies. It was just, these were companies that were early. Apple was a little bit older, and Steve had returned by then, but it wasn't something that was intentional at all. However, after my almost 6+ years at Apple, I started my own company. I left to form a startup, and a lot of that was informed by my last couple of years at Apple. I was leading design teams at Photos at the beginning, but towards the end, I was the user experience evangelist, and I was able to partner with all these amazing startup founders that were launching these brand new applications for the iPhone and the iPad, and it gave me this really deep appreciation for how much these founders are really taking care of their business, but then also in my role, helping them design really great apps, how much they also got into details. And they really care about the experience. And so the latter part of my career really was then starting to seek out and saying, I do like working at companies at scale, but I think one thing that's very interesting about design is it can really be placed all over the map in a different company. And one of the things that I really enjoy is partnering with founders and figuring out where does design fit into a company. Sometimes that's figured out, but I think that the reality is any great company is constantly growing. And a lot of what I'm able to do now is partner with great founders, or I have been able to partner together and figure out how does design fit into your company as it starts to scale, and how do you kind of continue to evolve that? And how do you make sure that, these companies that I've been attracted to and have worked at have all been known for really great design or great experience of their products? But that gets really challenging as the business grows and you're not, then just winning people over, but you're starting to focus on, market caps in the 10 to 20 and, multiple billions of dollars. Design, isn't top of mind in the boardroom all the time. But for founders, it's often something that they deeply care about. And I think that that's extremely fascinating. And so founder mode for me is just, it's not this negative thing. I've seen it firsthand and I see companies. I don't think it's about micromanaging. I think it's about founders getting into the details. And I appreciate that quite a bit. And I think anyone that's a design executive kind of understands that. You have to take care of the business, but a design executive has to get into the details.
This is so fascinating. Seriously, I do feel like you need to write a book definitely about all the different experiences that you had in all these companies, because I'm sure you've seen some of the most incredible interaction with those founders of these companies that we all know and admire. And you were literally in the middle of it, driving those decisions and being part of the growth. What would you say was different between different founders? Because again, I feel like sometimes we talk about this founder mode as one thing. Is like Ryan Chesky said it, so this is what founder mode is. But actually, there are so many nuances because we're all different people and founders are different. So, what would you say are the differences between different founder modes you've seen?
Man, that's a hard question, Katerina, because in my experience, each of these companies that I've worked for, they've all valued design greatly and the product experience, whether it's on the consumer side or the enterprise side. They've all been so unique. There's been a few trends in between. But more often, it's a difference in personalities and the difference in the business models that they're running and the time in the market, what's going on in the world right now. And each of these things has been so contextual that it's actually sometimes harder to find the common patterns versus the differences. But I would say, often it does come down to, design at the end of the day. It's a creator function. It's a people position, but ultimately it's a business function. And so much of what defines, each of those companies was the business that they're in, whether that's enterprise SaaS, whether that's consumer, whether that's marketplace, traditional software, etc.
Interesting. So what would you say were, if any of us had to learn from these founders, because we were not as lucky to meet all of them in real life, what would you say the top things that did work in the organization? So if anyone can use this founder mode in their thing, so from all the founders you've seen, what may be top 3 things that we should bring to the organizations?
Yeah, that's a good one too. I think anyone who's been an executive and worked with really amazing founders knows that so much of their role is playing a diplomat, balancing a lot of different egos. You hire a team, hopefully a diverse team where people align to a singular mission, but they're really bringing in different perspectives. And when you're trying to move fast and when you're trying to be ambitious in different markets, there's a lot of debates that happen, between an engineering organization, a sales organization, the product and design organizations, and, other ones as well. And I think a lot of what I see in the best founders that I've worked with are people that are able to gather the right team and kind of balance all of their different perspectives, listen really well, but then still have that ability to listen to their guts. And I think that is really unique. I think one thing that's so different about founders is they've had this ability, especially really successful ones, to kind of know that the world is telling you one thing and they went in a different direction and they succeeded. And that's something that they, really take to heart quite often. And I think that that's very different about a lot of other executives and a lot of other, CEOs that haven't had that founder ability, the kind of professional managers. I don't think there's anything wrong with professional managers or anything like that. And, I think founder mode and you kind of on a hike and saying it's one thing or the other. I think that, that is ultimately a lot of the difference is, you have to, it's not that you're not relying on a management team or you're not listening, but there is just some instinct. It's that same instinct that ultimately made them, jump off of a cliff and start a company, this crazy endeavor, and go with it and be successful. And I think it's about how do you carry that fire throughout, even as the company is sailing.
I love that what you said. At the same time, part of me kind of is now curious about how does this align to actually what we wanted to talk about today, which are all the interesting metrics and skills that you need to bring to show the value of design and kind of how it kind of can be translated into some sort of numbers. And you're saying that a lot of the founders were relying on their intuition. So it wasn't backed by the data. It wasn't backed by what the industry is saying. It literally was their gut feeling. So where would you say is this line between relying on intuition versus the data that you can bring to the table, as well as how did you work with them, knowing that maybe data is not going to convince someone to make a certain decision. Therefore, what were the things that you could bring to the CEOs that would make them believe that what you do is actually important?
Yeah, well, I first want to clarify. I don't think it's about ignoring the data or looking past it. I think it's about, really taking a deep look at all of the data, but then also having the right amount of skepticism in it and saying, how is this data collected? Is it enough? And, data is typically a trailing indicator. It's not, going to give you information on what's going to happen in the future. And a lot of what we're doing in technology and the companies that I've been working on are looking at markets that are going to be really big in the future and saying, okay, we have all this data on what's happening right now or what's happening in the past, but it's also, talking to a lot of people and seeing a lot of trends going on and seeing, it's a different type of data that I think informs your gut, that feeling there. And I think it's being able to interact with different people. And I think a lot of what design does is figure out those constraints, figuring out, how far into the future can you go? How far can the current business and technology that we have get into that world? And it's really hard, balance of when you just kind of do what makes sense and what you kind of take a little bit of a risk. And I think so much of what really great companies are able to do is take those calculated risks quite often. And I think that calculated piece is really important.
It's so great that you mentioned that it's not ignoring the data, but actually combining some sort of research and data and everything with your gut feeling. And also how you talked about that actually this gut feeling also comes from data. Is just maybe some weaker signals that you pick up as a curious person. And I think what unites all these founders, they're always very curious about what's happening in the market, what's products out there, what's happening outside of the market in the different spheres and different parts of the world. Like they're always in different conversation with exciting people. And I think part of it being surrounded by, again, smart, intelligent, but also curious people gives you this extra sources of information that maybe cannot be qualified as kind of chunks of data, but kind of give you the different signals that inform your gut feeling at the end of the day. So it's kind of data, just different data, I suppose. Which is quite interesting. Well, let's then talk about your wonderful new position at Zoom as a Chief Design Officer that you started almost 10 months ago. And I suppose the mystery for everyone is always this: how does one become Chief Design Officer? Was the job already there that you applied for? Was it created specially for you? What kind of conversation did you have? So tell us everything. How did it happen?
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, I'm still new at Zoom, so less than a year in. And so I'm still learning a lot here. I am the first Chief Design Officer here at Zoom, and this was a position that they opened up really because of what I mentioned earlier. This is a company that now is a household name and an amazing brand. Because of the pandemic, we had a huge amount of people customers use our product. And so the business is scaled out. And a lot of what started to happen was, starting to go into spaces that really much bigger companies, Microsoft, Cisco, have kind of owned. And we've had to add a lot of these, really necessary huge enterprise and big company features and building a lot of products. But Eric and the executive team really knows that a lot of what makes Zoom special is it just works. And a lot of what it just works means is not only the technology as the connection, but also an experience and people knowing how to use the product and talk to each other. And so they reached out to me when I was at Zendesk and were looking for a new head of design to really balance out the engineering and products triad. And so the chief product officer and the chief development officer are people that I work really closely with. And so that's how I became the Zoom's first chief design officer.
Love it. So to clarify, were looking for specifically Chief Design Officer, or was the job title not necessarily clarified? It was someone just to look after design and then it was crafted specifically in that sense?
No, I think it was a head of design role. I think that when they first did the search, they would have been content finding the right candidate without a Chief Design Officer role. I think they, it was really a lot of conversations with the hiring team that I was working with, that once they saw the pedigree that I had and the level that I was going to operate at, it made sense to put the chief design officer title for my particular background if I was going to join.
That's exciting. And I totally agree with you that it's so important to kind of find this match between the person and the job title and the role. And I love that they were not specifically looking for chief design officer, but more someone who can do certain things for the company. And then clearly you had a lot to offer to then show that this is actually the title that should be at C-level. And I suppose this is what a lot of designers in general struggle with when they want to get from, let's say, VP of design or head of design to this chief design officer. What kind of conversations do you need to have to actually show that you can do these things at C-level? Maybe what questions did people ask you to kind of test if you're ready for the role? What conversations did you have to show that this is actually a C-level role?
Yeah, I think before I answer that directly, I'll just say, for me, titles are both unimportant, but then, somewhat important. And a lot of what I was trying to balance out was what the title means internally to the company. The external titles, as I've work in so many different companies and cultures, I've realized they're a little bit meaningless. You can be a chief design officer at a startup and have no direct reports. And you can also be the head of design at a major company like Apple, and you'll just have at most a vice president title. And, that doesn't mean that these people have less influence or less skills or anything like that. The titles are kind of matching the internal culture of the organization. And so a lot of now, going back to your question, a lot of the conversations that I had was, what is Zoom trying to achieve with this head of design role? Is it someone to just manage a bunch of designers? Is it someone to be, the chief designer area? Or is it someone that's doing all of that, but then also a stakeholder in the business and thinking about where design fits into the company, where design can be used to set strategic vision, to kind of work, with not only the product and engineering teams, but sometimes the whole organization, including the board, in figuring out what the future is. And with my conversations at Zoom, it was very clear that, this is, we're on what our CEO Eric calls the Zoom 2.0 journey. And we are trying all together as an executive team to figure out where design will fit into Zoom for, the next 5 to 10 years of our company. And so with those conversations, it made a lot of sense to have the chief design officer title so that I could properly be, recognized for that position that I was playing.
Brilliant. Thanks for clarifying. And I totally agree with you. I do feel like titles can be misleading, and chasing titles is definitely not the way to go. But also it is something important in terms of the communication. It kind of shows that the company cares about design. If they have a chief design officer position, that they are design led because they do believe design should be at C-level. It also communicates internally what kind of decisions you can make and what kind of conversation you might be having. So even though I agree that it can be meaningless, but also it can be incredibly empowering, as well as for the rest of the industry to see that companies like Zoom are having chief design officer position can actually inspire the rest of the industry to take design more seriously. Because if more companies have those titles, then other companies will see that that's something that is a norm now. It's not like a special occasion. It's actually something that good companies do. So it's good for the entire industry, I would say. Now, talking about all this business impact and how design can be strategic within the organization, what are areas that you look after as a chief design officer now? Because as we learned from previous conversations with other chief design officers, you part of becoming or coming to the C-level, you have to stop caring about design as much and start operating with your C-level team. What kind of areas do you look after, and how do you work with the rest of the C-level?
It's a good question. I'm thinking about what you first said is, not thinking about design enough. I hope I'm thinking about design a lot. I think the reality is I have to prioritize things beyond just design. In my career, I came up, starting from an IC designer, making my way to this chief design officer role. My brain is naturally just thinking about design all the time. So I wouldn't say that I'm not thinking about design. I just, I'm not spending as much time on my day to day and tasks on design as much as it was earlier in my career. What I do have to spend a lot of time thinking about is the business side of things. What is our strategy? Do I understand it clearly? And then, what are, the economics of this? Is design, where does design fit in to each of these areas? And at a company like Zoom, it's pretty scaled up. We have multiple business lines. A lot of us know us for the meetings products, but we've got a really great phone, contact center, and we're building out a whole workplace productivity suite with Zoom Workplace. That's really growing. We have our webinars, events products. So we've got a really scaled out set of products, and each of those businesses have their own different strategies. And so each one of them will use design in a different way. And so it's really understanding, first that business area, then where design will fit in. And then, from there, it is the basic design management area, thinking about, the people and making sure that you have the right talent, you have the right skill level, you have the budget to actually hire and empower them. You have the right tools for them to kind of work. But, they're also going to be working with engineering and product manager partners. So making sure that they're the right collaboration partners and that you're kind of pairing things and you're kind of growing that team. And so, that is, a lot of what I spend my time with. It's just thinking about how to get the right people and the right teams set up to support the business.
Brilliant. It does seem like you have to wear multiple hats and kind of think of different parts, as you said, whether it is about business, whether it is about kind of marketing and strategy. And I wonder, considering you already had an incredibly successful career before that and worked at a really senior level at really huge organizations, were there any skills that you actually had to learn within the past 9-10 months that you felt like were completely new to you now that, again, the level of decisions is kind of going even higher?
Oh, yeah. I've learned so much here at Zoom. And that's the privilege of, I think, working at a lot of these companies and a lot of the founders that I've worked with is just the learning curve. It's both a fun job. I love my job, but it's challenging. The thing about Zoom is we move really fast and we support customers from all over the world. I had a great conversation with you, Katerina, when we first met. We were talking about just the global impact of what's happened with design. And there's just so many people from, especially in product and tech. When I started, it was mostly in Silicon Valley, North America, Japan, and Europe, and not many other regions, and, only parts of Europe too. And now it's this worldwide phenomenon that I think, learning so much about Zoom's customers, they're all around the world. But then we also scale from the yoga teacher that's trying to kind of do a remote yoga class, huge governments or banks that are running their business and having meetings over our areas, and just that variety of use cases of which they're using it is one thing to learn about. But then we also work with a global workforce here at Zoom. And so our employees are spread out all around the world. And so the challenges of understanding how to kind of make that work where you're bringing in this diversity, but you have to be aligned to the singular mission. And how do you communicate? And I think the thing that we're all learning, even at Zoom, is how to do this remotely. It's just not the same thing to be able to leave a meeting in Zoom and really just be cut off. Maybe you can chat afterwards, but a lot of where it used to be is a lot of those conversations, the hallway conversations after you're leaving a meeting and being able to debrief with a couple different people. And so I think so much of what's interesting right now about Zoom is that global side of things, and then how to get these cultures to move, to work together and move really fast, and how to do that mostly remotely. And so lots of great learnings from my first 2 months here.
I can imagine the teams that you work with spread around the world must be an interesting challenge, and would love to dive into the global world we live now in a second. But I have a few more questions about design in a boardroom, because I feel like this is such a unique situation right now, and I hope it will be the norm in the future. So we won't need to ask anyone, what does design do in a boardroom? What kind of conversations are you having? But for now that we have you who sees it day to day, how does the C-level, do you think, sees you as a chief design officer and sees design as a function? Again, we know as a design community what we want them to see us, but I would love to hear if you had any breakthroughs in terms of where they saw the value of design or where they justified kind of the investment. Any particular examples maybe where they're like, Mark, you're nailing it with your design team?
I'll first say that one of the things that a lot of designers, especially designers early in their career, make the assumption that, once you get to my level and you're the chief design officer and you have a seat at the table, that you're then, bringing those same conversations that designers are having today to that table or to the boardroom. And it's not true at all. The boardroom is a place to discuss business, and it's a place to discuss financials and challenges, risks, but how to grow the business ultimately. And what design has to do is understand that and kind of be the membrane between the design organization and those business conversations. Not appropriate. And I don't think most people want to work at a company where a board or an executive team is just talking about design all the time. I don't think that business will last very long. They need to be talking about the business mostly. And so a lot of those meetings are sometimes dry and they're looking at numbers, but they're super important, right? It's really understanding that piece. So at Zoom, what's, really interesting about our product and the whole space right now is how much we're looking artificial intelligence, AI, and we see this as just a huge game changer. And we know that this is going to be a major paradigm shift for many things, but especially for the design and the experience of products and how you use software. And, I think, transitioning and thinking about, well, now we have this graphical user interface that we've been used to for a while on the desktop, at least, 15 years or so now on mobile. We have this new conversational experience, and we have an AI that can do so much more with generative models, that this is going to be both a huge risk, but also what we're thinking about is just this tremendous opportunity. We move fast. We can learn all these things. And that's a lot of where I think the board conversations are around design at Zoom is really thinking about how to capture that opportunity.
Do you feel like those conversations about AI are more prominent and more discussed towards the design as a function? Does the C-level and the board feels like AI will disrupt design the most compared to, let's say, other sections and parts of the business, like whether it's finance, operations, or anything else?
That's funny you ask. I think it's going to affect the experience of the products the most, the user experience. But I actually just had a lot of my design leaders in San Jose, our headquarters, last week, and I had CEO Eric come in and give a talk. And one of the things that he mentioned was, designers in the design role is going to be one of the last roles to be displaced, by AI. And he was actually telling a very personal story. I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this with the world of how he's encouraged his daughter or his children to think about design as a role instead of engineering, because, he is an engineer from background, and he sees how much these tools are capable of displacing a lot of the different roles that he sees in the different business functions. And so, I do think that I'm not a believer that, all engineers need to be replaced. I think that this is a tool at the end of the day, and people that are equipped with this tool will thrive, and it will change the nature of what a lot of different tasks are doing. But I think design is in this unique area, kind of being this in-between role. It's not well defined. And because of that, it's not something that can be, models can train on really easily and then replace.
Wow, that gives hope, all of us. If your CEO is thinking that design is the last one to be replaced, then I think we have nothing to worry about, at least for a few years. And definitely, I believe the same, that creativity in a broader sense, not necessarily in the day-to-day work that we do now as designers, but creativity in a broader sense probably will be the last one to be replaced. But we can definitely utilize all the incredible tools that are out there to our advantage and actually enhance our day-to-day work and that output that we create.
I just want to say, because I do think it's important to just you can't ignore what's going on in the world. You have to grow and you have to learn and adapt. And I think as long as designers want to do that, they're safe. I think folks that are very focused on, the tasks they're doing right now and saying, whether that's a production side of things, especially a lot of production tasks that we're doing are going to be replaced. And when I think about the way I designed software about 25 years ago, that has all been replaced with tools already, not AI tools. And that's fine. I've adapted to the new things. And I think that's going to be the important thing for designers is as long as you're adapting and learning the new tools, you'll be fine.
You also mentioned when we were chatting earlier that potentially AI tools have more impact on junior roles than senior roles. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think a lot of junior roles are about production. And so if your role is just moving, pixels around in the boxes or constructing things, and a lot of times mimicking trends that are going on in the, different world, whether that's on the marketing or even on the, graphic UI side of things. Those are things that are becoming increasingly easy for AI models to do on their own. And it's going to be really important, people that are kind of more senior in the executive side, that we're kind of understanding that a huge part of what we're training kind of the earlier designers on are kind of the thought process and the thinking and the strategic parts. And the folks that are kind of more working on the strategic parts of design, that is the areas that you're trying to do new things. You're looking at what's around there, but you're actually making human decisions. And those are the areas that I think we're going to be really important, and, we'll never go away.
So more strategy, less moving pixels. I think that sounds like a better role for anyone, if I'm very honest. So that sounds fun. Let's go back to the conversation about global design and being a global chief design officer and just living in a global world. I love what you mentioned about how, by the fact that we're global as a community, as creatives, as designers, and I 100% agree, I see so much more design that comes from different parts of the world right now than it was 10, 20 years ago. So it does influence how we think, how we design, what we design. At the same time, the cultures are still very different in the world that we live in, and you having a product that literally works, I don't know, in how many countries, have to consider how different humans just generally interact with things differently. Can you tell a bit more? What was your thinking so far? Where did you get with your thinking so far about the global design perspective?
Yeah, well, I love this topic, and just, one of the things that I've really appreciated about working at some of the companies is not only being able to deliver products at scale to all these different geographies and users of different culture, but being able to work and collaborate with people from around the world. Because I think anyone that knows that if your customers are out there, you have to, really make sure you're building a diverse team on the inside as well to understand those perspectives. I think so much of what I learned early on in my career, when the markets were much smaller than they are today, and we're talking about millions of people and users instead of billions of people, was, this definition of what good design is. And I think it's a really fun, conversation to have over coffee or at the bar, is like, is that product designed well? And, is that good design? And I love learning about, it's like, good design for who? I think, something that a lot of people might be familiar with is, if you visit web pages on a Japanese site, you just look at this and say, there is just so much information going on. This is terrible design. How does anyone use this? But for that user base, that's exactly what they're looking for. And when they see something that might be a little bit minimal, and they're actually trying to reference something, it can be quite frustrating. And so I think, the global perspective really challenges me to think about what good design is. And then I've been able to take that even further and just say, even within smaller, not global side of things, that's also the truth. We've been too ableist earlier on, and saying good design is someone that has perfect vision, has, all abilities to do that. And it's like, well, that's not true anymore. And so I think, the global perspective has really challenged me to think about, like, what is good design? And I think more and more it's being able to deliver something that's, really great for each person, but it's not necessarily the same thing.
Oh, this is such an important point that you made. Thank you for sharing this. And I 100% agree with you. I was actually having similar thoughts, but more in the history of design, that I think we're all obsessed now with simplicity and kind of even physical objects, and smartphones being a classic one of like something that is very sleek and simple. And I recently visited a very old place in London. We have many old places here in London. That was obviously very intricate with a lot of gold, and that made me think of that era. And if someone saw an iPhone in that era, they would think that it's the ugliest thing in the world, because it just doesn't have all these things that are valued at that time. Like, the more lucrative and luxurious it is, the better. So someone who just didn't put any effort in kind of this intricacy must have not have thought of design. So again, even like in a history, I think we change our perception of design. And then you're right. And on top of that comes the culture and how we read and how we interact. And then our own personalities of what we like and we don't like, how again we interact. And we talk a lot about neurodiversity in at Fisherman Academy. And again, how as humans in general, we see things differently and read things differently and hear things differently. So therefore, of course, there is no perfect or best or good design. What I suppose, now that we established there is no good design, what are the at least things that we should strive for as a design community that potentially can get us to better design?
That's a hard one. I think the things that I think about a lot right now, just how to make sure, because, at Zoom, we have such a diverse audience, just like I mentioned earlier, that the users are ultimately using Zoom as a tool, right? It's a communication tool, a productivity tool, and trying to really understand people's intentions. I think a lot of times people forget, even though, they may be trained in this user experience side of things, and they're just thinking about a single task, but they're not really thinking about someone's full intentions. And it's not just their intentions when they're using the product, but, really their intentions, for their, in my world, thinking about for their job, because we're building software for work most of the time. There's a lot of people that obviously use Zoom for the consumer side, but where our business is, people are using it instead work. And I think, it's just really important to understand, people's intentions, what they care about, and then, just challenging that you can't just know it all. You have to kind of put stuff out there, and you have to measure in many different ways and how to validate that. But I'm going to have to think about this question a little bit more and get to it as the hard one.
I think we all have to think about this question as a community. I don't think there is the right answer, but I love the way your thinking was going about research and understanding. But I like what you mentioned earlier about customizing it per user. And I think with the AI and where the industry is developing, we'll definitely have more opportunity to create experiences that actually adapt to the person rather than kind of overall have the same thing for everyone.
Yeah. My experience at Apple when we're there during a special time of pre-iPhone and then, iPhone ruined the world, it was just amazing to see this singular product scale out. A lot of people don't know this because they weren't, there is, the experience that you have on an iPhone in China is different than the one in US and now different than the one in Europe, but it's still called the iPhone, but the software and some parts of the hardware are even different. And so, that's one of the reasons that business is so amazing is they were able to have a singular product that kind of is slightly different for all these different world markets, whether that's SIM things or different regulations. And that's a lot of what's interesting about Zoom as well. But I would bet that we're all using Zoom in a very different way. It's configured differently. We're on different devices, platforms, and we expect different things about it. And that's really exciting to me is like, how do you deliver, these products, that can really scale out to global markets and be useful tools for each person and what their intentions are. And it's going to be slightly different.
This is a great comment. And you mentioned how important it is to, again, create this special environment where the ideas are happening, whether it is global ideas, where we talk about, again, breakthrough ideas in terms of design and creating better products. And you've been in some of the most exciting companies who have very different cultures, very different product, but again, have the excellence in terms of the design and creativity. What would you say, or how would you say someone should create a culture that on one hand promotes this new and creative and breakthrough ideas, on another hand actually cares about the business side and again doesn't go too wild and too random, because I think those two have to go hand in hand.
Yeah, I love this question because I think culture is just so key at any company that wants to use design as a business to win in the market. And I definitely one of these people that believes that, not that strategy is unimportant, but I think most of the time culture is more important than strategy, and having the right people that have the right amount of expertise in their areas, but I think have the right ability to collaborate with other folks. And what I mean by other folks is, other people from different cultures in the world, like we were talking about, the different countries. But I think more than that, it's the different cultures that you might have in an engineering organization with design, with a product organization, with the sales and go-to-market side of things. And so much of what is hard about design is having, like we talked about this before at the executive CEO founder side, chief design officer, any head of design role has to manage egos as well within their organization. You both need to still light the fire into designers and say, you're different. You're going to do these weird things and try and really get people to be creative. At the same time, you need to be able to listen to a salesperson or they might say, that's not going to sell. It is really cool, but we can't win with that. And so let's try something else. Or go to someone on the engineering side. That is amazing, but that will take us 4 years to build. And then being able to then say like, yes, that was a good idea, but not for right now. And just be able to, kill that idea off. And so I think a lot of when I think about collaboration is people that are really driven and ambitious, but really collaborative as well. And are willing to just learn from their other practitioners within the company.
Thank you for sharing that. And I love how you talked about kind of creating this environment. There are lots of ideas, but also not being afraid of delaying the ideas, saying that they are great ideas, but not for now. And I've read a lot about how it was at Apple, where again, those kind of ideas were fostered and basically were given the full attention to get it to the extremes and the levels. And Steve Jobs would make them a reality one way or another because he believed it's possible. I wonder, what does it look on a practical level? Because I think a lot of companies try to imitate Apple, but realistically, I think it doesn't work for everyone and you can't just operate like that as a business.
And I'll first just say that, I think a lot of people don't succeed copying Apple because they don't have Apple's business model. They sell, they're now going into services a lot more, and that's a big part of their business, but they sell hardware and they use software as great user experience to sell that hardware. And so then they can be obsessive over all these different details of craft because people are, at the end of the day, are seeking that out and they're doing that. And most other businesses, that's not where their business model is. It's not, they're not looking for the best, software on a piece of hardware, the best experience. And so if you replicate that experience, you're probably going to be too slow. And they're also just at this huge scale that most people don't have. So I think that's sober. But, one of the things that I learned early on at Apple, which was amazing when I was just starting there as an IC designer, working on this new photo product that we launched called Aperture, was that great design can come from anywhere. So I was the lead designer on this project, and a few weeks into my tenure, we're working on a new feature there. And one of the engineers sent me an idea and said like, hey, have you thought of, I saw the UI that you had for this feature. What do you think about this? At that time, we were still using Photoshop for UI software. So he sent me a PSD file. I opened it up, and not only was it a better design than mine, that the layers were organized better. They were labeled properly. This was a file that was better than most of the files that I created, as a design artifact and was handing off to the team. And, I could have done a couple different things. One is just be like, hey, this is my job. Why are you going onto my turf? This is inappropriate. But I went the other direction and I looked at it. I said, this is a way better design than what I shared. Yes, let's go in that direction. And I think that's, it's a story I've told to a lot of people, especially as I'd gone into different management roles, because I think a lot of designers early on in their career really just thinking about like, oh, this is the part of the product building experience that I own. And I think that is ultimately the wrong way to think about it when you're building really great products. Everyone that's shipped anything great knows that it comes from a team of different people. You have to be able to put your ego aside and just say like, well, what is the right thing for the customer, and really obsess over that. And it doesn't matter where the ideas come from. It can come from, and that's been my experience. It's come from interns. It's come from, different people in sales or marketing. And I really try to channel that. So much of what a chief design officer needs to do is actually influence design outside of the design organization so that more ideas can come from so many of the people in that diverse team that you built.
Love this story. Thank you for sharing. And I think it also requires a certain mindset to, not just on the organization level, but on a personal level, to be that person who is excited about someone else's ideas and kind of wants more of them to happen. So how do you create that on a personal level and also on a company level? So now that you've learned that at Apple, were you able to somehow translate it and take it with you in other organizations? I don't know, is it as simple as doing a speech to all designers. You know what? This is how we operate, or to the whole company. We are all about collaboration. Our 3 values are, I just come from anywhere, but I have a feeling it doesn't work just from doing one speech. So are there any things you need to put in place on operational level, on any other level, to make sure that people feel their way and actually do what you just described?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it with calling out the operational pieces. I think, each company I've joined, especially in the last 10 years of my career, have been companies that have, been scaled to a certain point, thousands of people already, and they have a bunch of processes in place. And so the thing that's really important is to first understand all that stuff works when you join an organization as a head of design, and then understanding, what are the gaps there that are maybe holding design back, or, not allowing design to kind of move as fast as they would want to, or move in an innovative way. And a lot of this, at Apple, that could work because you did have engineers, that were able to think about design in that way. Most companies don't have those benefits of having an engineer that's thinking and able to craft design in that way. And a lot of times you have to then put different processes and understand, do you need actually, many of the organizations that I've led actually I've ended up building engineering teams within the design organization and having kind of either prototypers or creative technologists, and there's all, design engineers, and, there's all these new titles kind of coming out. And that's a different way to create the right kind of culture to be able to move fast and build things and experience it, but not slow down an engineering team that has, bugs to fix and customer things and servers to keep up. I mean, so how do you find that right balance of, so innovating really fast, but really not just in Figma or Sketch or Photoshop, but actually in code with new ideas. And then a lot of it is, just how the data is coming in too, and making sure that designers aren't spending their time looking and seeking out all the different data points that they need. Product managers, if they're not able to provide it, data scientists or other analytic people. And so it is, very unique to each company, but the operations and the way communication flows is, so important.
This is a great point about the communication and operation is part of something that maybe is not as prominent and as seen, but actually that's what creates great design and great culture. We actually spoke to the leadership team at Uber, and they talked about how it's very much a data-driven organization. So every single person in the company had access to the dashboard with all the data of how it was growing, what's happening right now. And that kind of helps people to inform the decisions, whether it is a design decision, whether it's a marketing decision or any other decision, and just making it easy for people to get to the things that will inform their decision. I think is such a great way to make sure everyone goes in the same direction.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the hard things is how to get a lot of people in the design organization to care about that stuff. This is not stuff that they've been trained to learn about. They've been, thinking about graphic software or user methodologies. And I love opportunities for when I can explain an earnings call, or, really explaining, what happened on a quarterly business review, or what, some big customer, trying to achieve, and they're telling us in a briefing, and then really be able to translate that down to the design organization and have them understand that, yep, we're designing, we're creatives, but we're ultimately a business function, and they should be excited about that. And everyone has their different curve and how much they want to learn about that. And so it's important for design leaders to kind of meet people where they are, but then also try to elevate them at the same time.
Have you found any way to get designers inspired about finance and business metrics and everything else?
I think a lot of times it's easier to talk about things going on outside of your own company. And a lot of times understanding, difference. One of the best ways is when people complain about a bad design for another product. That's when I'll always challenge them of but you're not that business. And here's a good example of a lot of right now that's very relevant. A lot of people are talking about the Jaguar redesign. They just did their logo, and I'm seeing a lot of people on social media saying this is a terrible logo. They're redesigning it, and I think it's a fun conversation. But I think it's an opportunity for me to say, but what are they trying to do as a business with that? And are you really thinking about that when you're criticizing the logo, or are you just thinking about how you feel about it personally in your own? And are you even a Jaguar customer? What say do you have in this logo and this redesign as someone that was never going to buy one either before or after this redesign. Or if and I think those are these opportunities to actually talk about this business side of things. And then that's, able to say, well, what are we trying to do here at Zoom or whatever company you're at as a business? And so like, what is good design for us? Getting people, out of this thinking that just thinking about themselves or their markets.
I'm so glad you mentioned the recent news because I 100% agree with you. I feel like we as a creative community talk about how no one understands us and we do the hard work and then we do the same to other people. And it always makes me so sad that somehow we should use more empathy. I think this is what we trained on. And you're right. We don't know anything about the business or the strategy or anything that went behind the scenes, or we don't know anyone who works in it who could tell us the story. So I think judging just on something that we saw, and you're right, especially if we are not a customer but considered being a customer, then it's a wrong approach. Or when you start thinking about the business lens and what potentially was business trying to do and was it achieving their goals or not, as long as we don't know, we'll see what will it do what it was planning to do or not. If the sales go up, then they nailed it. If the sales go down, then maybe they didn't.
Yep. There's some good metrics for some of these business side of things. And I think this is especially important for people working in enterprise software like I have been for the last few roles I've been in, where, often the person that you're designing for, the user, is not the actual customer, right? They're not the one making the purchase decision of the software. And so you're having to think a lot, about, their businesses and understanding what, the customer, not just the user using the tool, but how does, the person buying the software think about the value? And that's also a big part of design as well.
100% agree. Would you think organizations need to be design driven to be open to promote or to bring a designer to CDO role, or just being a designer with a solid understanding of business and strategy suffice?
I think it is like, as you were mentioning, Katerina, the chief design officer role is something that is becoming more common now, but it's still so early across so many different companies that I think there's a lot of variance. I think the important thing is not necessarily, again, the title, but I think it's how much does the executive team, what do they want to do with design, and how much trust do you have with them, and kind of, what makes sense for their specific area. I think design driven doesn't necessarily mean it's driven from the design organization. I think design to me is a lot about intentionality. And I think some of the best designers, when I think about design in a bigger stance, have been the actual founders and entrepreneurs, not the actual design, people that are in different design tools and pushing pixels around. They're just thinking about something in a different way. And I think that is probably more important. Understand if the business and strategy pieces need to be there to have a chief design officer role. But I think it's, how intent driven is the organization, and how much does the executive team need someone that has to meet the design function to balance that out or not. A lot of times you don't need that because a lot of the people at that role have that skills. And you need someone just to lead a design team. Other times they really want to balance and contrast out their skill set and have someone with the design organization at their C-suite.
So to clarify your point, because I feel like you made such an interesting point about where just design fits within the organization as well. So does it mean that to become a chief design officer, you need to kind of assess all the other C-level suite and see what potentially skills are missing? And sometimes they can be design skill, whatever, design in a strategic way skills. Sometimes there can be other skills, and you just need to bring that set of skills so the puzzle is complete. And that would be your role, whatever it's called, whether it is chief design officer. Sometimes we see also chief brand officers, chief creative officers. We see chief design and product officers coming in. So is it about analyzing the C-suite and what is the missing puzzle there?
Yeah, I think so. Because when I look at some of the best companies that, I respect for, their products are really well designed, many of them don't have chief design officers. It's because a lot of that C-suite already values design in a strong way and knows where design fits in. It's not that they don't have this huge respect or heads of design there. They just don't have a chief design officer title because it doesn't make sense for their particular business. In other organizations, they might have a chief design organization because they're really hoping to kind of balance out their own skill set, like you mentioned.
This is actually fascinating. I never thought about it this way, that actually that the fact that someone has, or the organization has, or doesn't have chief design officer position, it can be the opposite. So if there is no chief design officer, that means design is good everywhere. We just don't need one, and everyone understands design. So it could be a good thing. I suppose it's not very easy to understand on the surface when you look at the organization, but you're so right. If everyone deeply cares about it, there does need to be a title about it.
Yeah, that's where it goes back to the culture question for me. The culture of design is really the most important thing for me is as far as seeing companies that have delivered amazing products and are winning, growing businesses with those amazing products, right? It's the culture of appreciation of design that matters more than, what titles you have within the company.
You're so right. And it also made me think that maybe, because there are so many questions that people submitted before is about how to become chief design officer and what's the journey. And I suppose an interesting question also to think, why do you want to be chief design officer? Is it because you want to be in a C-level? And then maybe your role shouldn't be chief design officer. Maybe you should be chief marketing officer or whatever. It might be something else that, again, you can bring a unique set of skills to be at the C-level because you want to make these big decisions and what you're passionate about, big decisions, being with the board, making tough strategic choices. Or do you want to be chief design officer because you want to make the most out of design, to lead design to the new kind of era and bring the most of design skills within the organization? Then maybe you don't need to be a C-level at all, because if everyone cares about design already, you will bring much more value by being an incredible VP of design or head of design who will just kind of utilize all the skills and energy within the organization.
Yeah, I mean, me personally, I would be very fine. I hope to be at Zoom for a long time. So I don't want to give anyone the impression that I'm going anywhere soon, but I would have no problem in my next role not being in a chief design officer role and having a different title. What matters to me is how can I join an organization and help them win as a business? And I think ultimately that's what a lot of people should be thinking about when they're at that most senior head of design role is just like, how can you do that and want to do that? And, other people, if that title is really important to them, that's for them. I don't want to judge. But for me, it's more about thinking about like, well, how can I go in and just help this company win? And then having the title, like I said, just matches that position that fits into that company.
That's a fantastic comment. Danielle is asking, to gain the appropriate experience for a CDO role, how many different experiences are necessary to bring a breadth of experience to the C table? How long is too long to stay at one company?
I don't know if staying at one company matters. I do think that, we already talked a lot about the importance of the business side of things. I do think that understanding the craft matters quite a bit. But I think one thing that we haven't talked about is the importance of understanding the domain that you're working in. And so that can come from working in many different companies, or it can be, maybe one company for a long time. If that company is in the same space and you can kind of graduate up, or, a competitor, you don't need to work at a whole bunch of different companies. And so I think that exposure to understanding design, understanding business, but then understanding the specific domain. Zoom is in communication and workplace productivity for knowledge workers and really beyond. We also serve a lot of frontline workers and customer experience professionals. And so I just happen to have personally jumped from a few different companies like Zendesk, really let me learn a lot about customer experience and employee experience. And Zoom has a huge contact center business that a lot of people don't know about. And I've also worked at Slack, and we're working on a lot of different chat products and a lot of different communication areas for Zoom. But I've also worked in a lot of video and, just different client software from my experience. And so, I just happen to have a lot of domain experience from those different companies. And so I think it's the combination. You can get that with a whole bunch of different mixes from one company or multiple, but I think it's balancing design, domain, and business.
Great summary. I do believe that business is such an important, as you've heard already, we do believe that design is that's a missing piece that could take designers so much further. And if anyone, I suppose, ever wants to progress, I think that's probably one skill that can take them very far. We have a question from Noah. What is a practical way of demonstrating the business value of design to an executive team or business area that sees design merely as making things look nice? Or is blind to how design can actually improve the business. Have you done anything specific to convince leaders that design needs to be at the C-suite? I would expand in general, were there any examples of showing the REI on design, like any particular cases that you can share when you brought something and said, look, this is your physical REI and design. This is why it's important. This is the number and this is how it matches to design.
Yeah, this is a great question. One thing that I love to do is to kind of overcome, thinking, the designers just operating as tech readers, is once you do have a good understanding of the business, the domain, the competitive landscape, but then also the capabilities that an engineering and go-to-market team has within a company, help the company and help the founders or the executives or any leaders paint a vision. One of the things that is really great about designers is it's relatively cheap for us to just put ideas out there, in a 6-month or 2-year or 5-year timeframes and just invoke different conversations with people about what if and saying, hey, this is, one way of doing things. We can do it this way. But, it doesn't take that much money like it would in an engineering team to kind of build out those ideas, go to this market and fail. And it's for designers to just set a vision and say, this is also a different way of approaching it. What do we think about that? It's not something that we're going to replace the current features, but it's going to challenge them to think about different ideas. And I think really great design leaders have that balance of being able to do that. And I think when you have those conversations and they're not out there that are so separated from a current business or just something that's cool, because the designers think that, but it's actually something that would help the business grow and help the brand be differentiated. Those are great opportunities to work with, leaders and really evolve their thinking about what design is.
Where would you say someone should start looking when they would try to find this insight? What would help business grow? Because I like your comment that it's not just about painting a vision that it's cool and fancy and this is what we could do, but actually aligning with what will help business grow. But for that, you do need to understand the kind of the trajectory the business is on and kind of how what you're planning to present connects to the rest. So if someone is sitting right now and is like, I want to do this, where should they go and look for this kind of idea?
Yeah, I think this is where, it's like, look at where the data is today. Like, how are people using it? How are, people not using it? Where, other products, other experiences. And I think a lot of that is really helpful and grounds non-designers in looking at design. Is like, hey, this person is not just thinking about these ideas for themselves. They really do understand, what's kind of going on. And a lot of times, if you're going to be setting a vision, you're hopefully doing something that's not already out in the marketplace and it's something very differentiated. And so it's this combination of like, you have this secret sauce of like, only internal to the company knows what's going on with their data. And then you're combining that with this, hopefully multiple visions of like, hey, and so based on that, and based on what we know about our brand and how we want to show up and our personality and how people perceive us, here are some ways that you can think about like, this is, what informs, in this particular vision. And here's a different vision. It could go that way based on either we're interpreting the data the wrong way or all that data that we see is going to shift because of this new trend of AI or because of this new trend in economics or just new way people are using different products. And so I think it is really important to be very informed about what's going on internal and external in the world to be able to do that successfully.
This is such a great way of how you explained it. So on one hand, look internally for the data that can inform this idea. So I think designers definitely don't have a lack of ideas. They have lots of ideas from research, from talking to users, the pain points people have. There are multiple things that are out there that they know would be great to kind of work on, but then look for the data, which one is the biggest, which one is missing out on the biggest part of the market, or is the biggest pain point for the users that stops them from using the product. But on the other hand, thinking externally, what are the biggest market shifts, economic shifts, any other trend that again will open the product to the biggest market share. So, and then just choosing essentially the biggest opportunity for growth. Because at the end of the day, all businesses are interested in more users, more money, more things that they can then utilize to actually grow. So finding out of all ideas, which one is the biggest in terms of, I suppose, market size and from the financial side, is probably the best way to start painting the vision.
Yeah, I think another thing that your comments just, remind me of is a lot of the conversations that you'd have with this vision is to appropriately ask, well, what if one of our competitors or if a startup actually achieve this mission? How would that affect our business? Because I think that those are some of the harder questions that teams have to struggle with, right? A lot of times designers are putting stuff out there, and just great designers are challenging an organization to kind of say like, hey, we need to move faster into this space. But that's a huge, multi-million dollar investment, or hundreds of thousands, or even possibly even billions, depending on what scale you're at. And that's a lot of risks to undertake. But I think in this world that we're in, things are moving so fast. The risk not moving there fast and not taking that is often bigger. And then being able to, understand that and use design vision and products to have those conversations is super valuable, and, definitely makes people respect design in a different way.
Thank you for giving this. I like how this is such a great mindset to use. What if our competitors do this? I think this is a great way to communicate your ideas, but also kind of understand how relevant they are to the current state of the business. And definitely a conversation started with an executive team. So let's go back to more questions that we have. So Merwin is asking, elevating design into a strategic level requires both capabilities and opportunities. What advice would you give design leaders to get those opportunities if they're not really given them?
Especially tough these days, because I think there's, we're in this weird economic states, and there's a lot of now very senior designers that could possibly go into executive roles, but it's not clear how many of those roles are open. I think one of the most important things to do is to network properly. I've really can't tell you how many opportunities have come my way just through different connections that, wasn't trying to look for different roles, but just talking to different people, keeping up with them and hearing what's kind of going on the ground. And so sometimes the opportunities aren't going to come from networking with just C-level people. Sometimes they can be just talking to different designers or ICs or just anyone that you meet at conferences or different areas on social media, and just putting yourself out there, talking about what you care about and what's important, and hoping somewhat that the world will take care of you. So I think, networking, not just at those, very advanced levels, but really showing what you're passionate about and being authentic has been something that's been really valuable to me. And then I think the other thing I would encourage is go after it. I think a lot of designers are willing to fail with designs and pixels, but they're a little bit more scared to fail face to face or in person. And I think that's something that holds our industry back quite a bit. And we need to get better, about saying, I tried to do this thing, it didn't work out, or I tried to find this, and they didn't want it. And you just have to keep on going. And so I would encourage a lot of designers to just put themselves out there more.
Brilliant. 100% agree with you with both points about networking. And I think networking has such a maybe bad connotations. I feel like maybe has been overused in too many places, but in general, talking to humans, we as designers, as creatives, I think that has been our job, to interview other humans, to empathize with other humans. So I think connecting with other humans in any sort of possible way, whatever feels organic, whether it's in real life, LinkedIn's of the world, online, there are so many opportunities for all of us to have conversation, including this wonderful chat that we are having now. And I do believe that the more conversations you have in general as a human, first of all, that the more interesting information you gain, and you just, if you are curious, then you kind of learn from all these wonderful people, but then it opens opportunities that maybe 5 years later, maybe 5 months later, suddenly become an important part of your life, which is fantastic.
Yeah, one thing we talked about earlier is just how you can be helpful to an organization, right? And I think that works at all levels, whether you're an IC designer or a design executive at the top, and just really being able to understand who you're talking to. And so, if you can talk to a CEO or, an executive team and say have you thought about the world like this? And, how could you be helpful to them is probably the best way to understand how to get those most senior roles.
That is a brilliant advice. And anything else that you would say is a good mindset to think about when, I suppose, companies on their highest versus lowest time? Because we talked about economical kind of landscape And I suppose it's different in different countries and feels different. In any case, there are companies who are doing well. There always will be companies who are doing well in a specific time, and there are companies who are not doing well. So how would you say a designer should approach something if they are inside the company that potentially is not in the growth curve? So talking about how we're going to create new product will transform, maybe it's not the conversations that everyone wants to have because everyone is kind of in a survival mode.
Being super curious and understanding that chief design officer role or that head of design role isn't so well defined across the industry and across different companies is really important. And so, when you have these conversations with some of these people, you kind of say like, hey, I bring all these skills to the table. And so I'm the right person. And it's like, you shouldn't believe that, but you shouldn't believe that you bring a lot of skills on the table, but you shouldn't assume that you're the right person for the role until you've been a little bit curious and you've had lots of conversations about what they're trying to do and what their challenges are. And I think a lot of people just assume that whatever their chief design officer or their head of design did is the same thing that this other company or this other executive wants from for their chief design officer. Is probably the number one way to not get the conversation, because it's so different. And I think saying like, I have all these different experiences, but I want to learn like what you're trying to do. And then very quickly being able to say, oh, okay, well, here's, the way I would think about this. And have you thought about your product and your business like this? I think are just really great ways to interact.
I mean, that's great advice. I'm conscious that we are running out of time, and I do wish we had a few more hours to unpack all of the wisdom that you have. I have one last question left for you, Mark, which we ask everyone who comes on our podcast, which is a bit of a philosophical question. Are you ready?
Go for it.
If you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
I love this question. I did hear some of your other podcasts, so I was thinking about this and then challenged Anita, as someone that does get meta. It's a tricky one. For me, I definitely think about inequality and, what are the different ways that we can make the world more equitable for everyone? I just had so many experiences seeing some of the challenges of people that were so talented just not have the right opportunities. And so, you can think about this in so many different ways. It's like, where would you change? Starting with just, fresh water, shelter, food scarcity. These are still fundamental problems for a couple billion people on our planet. But I think, going beyond that, I think for me, thinking about it would be amazing if everyone had access to a liberal arts education and a person that believed in that. And I think if those two things happened, that would also sustain equity with a lot of the human dynamics that we have. And so I think a lot about, how can we make the world just, give more people more opportunities to do great things? And I think we would all benefit from that.
Mark, I feel like this is a fantastic answer, and I couldn't agree more with you. It's something that is very close to my heart as well. So, definitely more equality, more opportunities would just open up more doors for everyone. And seriously, we would live in a better world. So it only makes sense. So thank you for this. Thank you so much, Mark, for all of your wisdom, all of your stories and generous ideas and for being so honest about what your role is and where you're going with it and what's next for you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Katerina. And thanks everybody for the great questions. Hopefully my cold and brain fog didn't make me ramble too much. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
You were incredible. I don't know how you seriously did it with not full energy. I can only imagine what you sound like when you have all of your energy back. But thank you so much for going through this. And thanks everyone for joining. And until next time. Bye.